Catholic Q&A, where every Friday we seek to answer your questions and clear up common misunderstandings about the Catholic faith. I'm your host, Larry Hazer, along with CRE for St. Mary's, Judy Connor, and Father Greg Machad, our pastor here at St. Mary's Parish in Neilsville. And the second part of our discussion that we had the last time, we were talking about the topic of annulment, and then a question was brought up about marrying a divorced person. Yeah. Maybe we could maybe dwell on that a little bit here today.
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest reasons, well, let me say this right, but a big reason that people stop practicing their Catholic faith is that, you know, they suffer the tragedy of divorce, and it is a tragedy, and that's not a condemnatory statement at all. It's really a statement of compassion. Because nobody goes into marriage going, well, yeah, we'll probably get divorced one day. You know, that's not anybody's intent, and then sadly it does happen, and nowadays kind of quite frequently. But then what happens is there's this belief that a divorce through the civil courts means that the marriage no longer exists, and we talked about that in the annulment, talking about the annulments, and that's not true, because marriage is given us by God, not by the state. And so the state's part in that is kind of like his stuff and her stuff. You know, they take care of the who gets what type thing, to oversimplify it. But in terms of marriage itself, no human being has authority over marriage. But we've been conditioned to think that, well, divorce means, no, I'm single, I'm free to marry. No. That's why the annulment. So what happens is people then get into another relationship with somebody, thinking, so there's no ill will here, thinking that, well, I can start dating again and maybe get married, not realizing that the marriage bond is always presumed to be valid until it's proven otherwise. So they're married, and they unwittingly end up in this, I'm married, but now I'm in a relationship with somebody else, and it is ultimately adulterous. It is an adulterous relationship. Again, not assigning ill will to anybody. I would say the vast majority, not to say that some people don't know this, but the vast majority of people don't realize what the dynamics that are happening. And then they go ahead and then they can't approach the church. So there's probably some level of understanding there. Or if they do approach the church and the priest says, well, we need to go through the annulment process, well, then they might have all these other misconceptions about what annulment is, and they go, forget it. And whatever the case is, they find themselves in a married, divorced, and now, I'm going to put it in air quotes, remarried, because you can't get married again. Remarried situation. And then they know that the church, God through his church, can't condone that. And then they'll oftentimes walk away from practicing their Catholic faith. They're hurt, they're confused. So again, part of the reasons we're doing this is to try to clear things up a little bit. So, you know.
One of the things that I hear from people is, okay, I got divorced, and maybe they didn't get annulment, got remarried, they can't come to church, they can't go to communion because they're living in sin, and so addressing that, I mean, they would have to go through that annulment process.
Right, and that's why we said in the last episode that the annulment process is part of the healing ministry of the church, because the truth sets us free. Now we know if an annulment, just touch on that quickly, if the church investigates the marriage, or there wasn't a marriage as such, now both of them know that they weren't actually married in God's eyes, and now they can pursue marriage. Conversely, if the church investigates, says, no, you guys knew what you were getting into, you're married, and the church has no authority. No human person has authority to bring to an end marriage. Now their freedom comes from knowledge of, I can't get myself into another situation, into another relationship, which would then shackle the person, because then they'll know. So the freedom comes on either end of that. What was
And communion, if they,
Right.
and I guess I think about that too, if a person got divorced, but they're not in any other relationship, can they come and receive communion? I think there's kind of some misconception sometimes from
There
people
are.
in that, and then if they do get remarried and don't have an annulment, can they receive communion?
Yeah.
Are they living in adultery and
Right. Well, let's just real quick go to, this isn't the bald-headed guys in Rome's opinion. This is Jesus' own words from Matthew 5, verse 31 through 32. He says, "It was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a bill of divorce. But I say to you," so he's referencing the Mosaic law. Moses made exceptions. They weren't condoned by God, but they made exceptions, Jesus says elsewhere, because of the hardness of your hearts. But Jesus says, "But I say to you," so who is he? He's God. He is the author of law. He is the law, if you want to say it that way. "I say to you, whoever divorces his wife," and then it says, "unless the marriage is unlawful," which is a very deep subject, by the way, "causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." So these are Jesus' own words. So I guess I'll say this, the best thing for someone to do if they do experience the tragedy of divorce is approach the church to have it investigated, so that they know what their status is. They know what they can and can't do.
One thing people might think is, because I'm divorced and I'm in a relationship with somebody else, the church shuns me, so to speak.
Yeah, no.
So they don't come to church because of that fact.
Right. So this goes to your question about communion too. Anybody is welcome in the doors of the church. Anybody. Doesn't matter, at any time they're welcome into the doors of that church to participate in Mass. But then when it comes to the Eucharist is the reality that it is God. Okay? Under the form of bread and wine, it is God. Jesus, body, blood, soul, and divinity. It also is symbolic in the sense that it's because it's symbolic in that when I go up and receive that Eucharist, I'm saying I am in communion with Christ and His church. Morally, by my actions and the status of my soul, and also in terms of faith. I accept everything that the church teaches. Doesn't mean I understand it all, but it says I accept it. When somebody is in a married, divorced, again, quote unquote, remarried situation, they are, by Jesus' own words, living in an adulterous situation. That's grave sin. And so the church, God has always taught through His church, that if you eat, St. Paul says, if you eat and drink the body of Christ without discerning, you eat and drink judgment on yourself. So it's not the church shunning people, it's the church saying, we're trying to protect you.
Right.
They're trying to protect you that you don't bring God's wrath onto your soul. And so if somebody's in a state of, not in a state of sanctifying grace, okay, they have unconfessed mortal sin on their soul, they should not receive the Eucharist. And it's not shunning anybody, it's trying to protect them. So
I mean, they can still come to church. I mean,
absolutely.
yeah, it's just that
Just
they
don't
can't
come for
receive
communion, right? And that goes for anybody. Like, I'll use my own example. Before I had my reversion back to the faith, I shouldn't have gone up for communion. I did. Those few times I went to church, I did. And I knew, I reflect back on this, I knew deep down, I knew what my status was, the status of my soul. But I still went out there. Well, I shouldn't have either. I wasn't married, divorced, or remarried. I just wasn't married, but I was living like I was. And so, it's across the board. So the idea of receiving the Eucharist means I'm in union with the church morally, and in terms of faith.
But marrying a divorced person is committing serious sin. That's the bottom line. Basically.
Oh, right. It is adultery.
Yeah.
And again, I want to stress, I'd say 99.9% of people don't know this. They don't know this.
Unless that's annulled. Maybe we should explain that, or
Yeah.
clarify that too. If the divorced person does have an annulment, then that's all.
Correct.
Then that's different.
Correct. Because this is where it gets. The divorce doesn't end a marriage. A divorce does not end a marriage.
Right.
It's maybe you could look at it this way, that a divorce is a public declaration of a separation.
Okay.
Okay? That's maybe a fair way to say that. That's not how the world looks at it, but that's maybe the most accurate way. An annulment doesn't end a marriage. An annulment simply is, after investigation, a declaration by the church that there was not a marriage from the beginning, because one or both of the couple didn't have sufficient understanding of the three essential properties of marriage: freedom, permanence, and openness to life. And so there wasn't a marriage from the beginning. So if a person now goes through a divorce and the church declares your previous attempt at marriage is null, meaning there wasn't a marriage, then you're free to marry because you weren't married before. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many nuances here,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to be clear, and I don't feel like I am. But yeah, let me just see what the topic of annulment, and maybe bringing that up in a homily when the gospel reading talked about of marrying a divorced person and committing serious sin. So I think you said before, does that, or one of you said, are they saying if you marry a divorced person, are you committing serious sin? And if that's the question, because it's not the formal question, then yeah, yes, it is.
And that may, we talked about, may just have people not come back to church because of the fact that,
Right.
well, I'm not going to change what I'm doing, so.
Well, and the beauty is everything can be healed.
Right.
Right? Once I know the truth, now I know how to approach it. It may not be easy, but everything can be healed. And I can live in union with God. But the first step of that is being open to wanting to know what the truth is. So,
One more thing, I don't know if
Yeah.
we got to it. Let's say you do marry a divorced person,
mhm.
and you're in the relationship for a while.
Mhm.
Can you still go ahead and get an annulment later on down the road?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, that can be done anytime.
Okay.
I would encourage it. If you go through divorce, do it quickly. Do it as
It
quickly
isn't
as
that you
can.
have to be remarried then in your current marriage then.
Well,
if you
then the
go-
church would bless that marriage
Okay.
after. So if there's a declaration of nullity, then the church you'd go to the priest or a deacon and then have your marriage blessed through the rite of holy matrimony in the church. And that's usually almost always done as a very quiet, simple ceremony. But you basically just extract out from the whole rite, you extract out the actual marriage rite itself. So the questions prior to consent: are you here freely, permanently, and open to life? And then I do, and that's essentially it then. And then God has blessed that, because that's how God works, is through His church. God has blessed that marriage, and now it's.
I'm just thinking maybe if somebody watches this video and says, hey, there is a chance where I can
Yeah.
not commit serious sin through, maybe I can still get an annulment even though I'm in a
Right.
divorced
Oh,
relationship.
absolutely, and I've walked with many couples through that who have been married for many years, civilly. And then they came to this point where they said, we want to have previous bond or bonds investigated, and if we're free to be married in the church, then we want to do that. And it is, I can't tell you the joy. I'm serious. I can't tell you the joy that they experience at that. I've had that happen numerous times. Yeah.
Yeah, the release of
Yeah.
all freedom.
Exactly,
Yeah.
freedom. I've had people come in and have been married for many, many years, civilly, and the weight that they're carrying.
Yeah.
I know people maybe cynically call that, well, that's that Catholic guilt. There's something right about guilt, though, isn't there? Not
It's
that
there for a reason.
it is.
Yeah.
Not that guilt drags us down, but it's an awakening. It's like burning your finger. Heat. Once it gets to a certain point, your brain goes, "Wait a minute, something's not right," and that's like the heat of getting too close to the burner. And hey, I need to take care of this. And then what happens is, in the healing ministry of the church, is that guilt is wiped away by coming to know the truth and then dealing with it accordingly. And I've had, like I said, numerous couples that come in just carrying huge weight, and then after everything is said and done, they're like, "Oh, thanks be to God. Thanks be to God." Yeah, the truth will set you free. So, yeah, I hope it's somewhat clear. I don't feel like I was being real clear there at the beginning. So, but
I think we answered the question.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
And that's what we're here for, right?
Yeah.
It's called
Catholic Q&A right
Yeah,
now.
So
Hey, if you
Yeah,
have
that's
any
right.
ideas for a name for this thing, maybe Catholic Confused Priest, I don't know. But if you got any ideas for a name, submit them. And then remember, you can submit your questions. Easiest way is Google up St. Mary's Neelsville, and then go to our website, and there's a email link on there, and you can click on that and just put in the subject Catholic Q&A or question, and we'll put it in the hopper. We got a nice conglomeration of questions here that we're going to get to over time, so maybe one of them will be yours soon.
all right, that's Catholic Q&A for this time around. Join us next time.